So it's lesson 1 of fall COMP2084 server-side scripting. We've been talking about the class, kind of got introduced to ASP.NET, and we're going to spend just the last hour of class today. This is the only video for today. We're going to fire up Visual Studio and see what the template looks like for an ASP.NET MVC application. So I'm going to open up, I am going to use Visual Studio 2017. I spent most of yesterday removing and reinstalling it. So I'm going to open that up. It's not gentle on your operating system. It uses a lot of resources. Okay, it's powerful, but it requires quite a bit of memory. So just give it a second. Notice it says updating the news channel. This is one of the other neat features of Visual Studio is they publish almost daily news and updates about new things going on with Visual Studio, with ASP.NET. So new tools or updates or new releases of things. You can turn off this screen if you don't want it when it starts, but I find it's pretty neat. Visual Studio also includes, I should mention this, includes this tool called Xamarin. Anybody ever heard of Xamarin or work with it before? Yeah, Alex, what's Xamarin?
As far as I know, it's basically when you want to create an app that's going to be working on desktop and mobile. For example, Android. It's not translate the code into so that Android can be used on Android phones, and it's basically multi-platform development.
Yeah, so Xamarin was a company started by a bunch of developers years ago where they said, we want to build iOS apps and Android apps, but we want to use C# to do it. So they created basically a plugin for Visual Studio so you could write your applications in C#, but compile them for an iPhone to run on an iPhone or an Android. And it was so popular that Microsoft bought Xamarin, and it's now included, it's now bundled right into Visual Studio. It used to be an extension you had to install. Now you install Visual Studio, you get it. So we'll see when we go to create a new project, we'll actually have the options to build an iOS app or an Android app right within Visual Studio. So to create a new project, we'll click on File, New, and Project. And we're going to see all of the different project templates. So we're using Visual C# as our language. And if we click through some of these, oh, I didn't install the Xamarin when I did my install. But what we're concerned about in this class is web, and it basically gives us two options. The core web application, which we're not going to use. We want this one. We're going to choose ASP.NET Web Application. And then it asks, where do we want to save the project? So I think by default, it will save them in your Documents folder under Visual Studio 2017 or 2015, and in there's a Projects folder. You can change that. You can save them anywhere you like. Save mine. We're set up for our course. So I'm going to change the location of where to save this, but you can save yours wherever you like. 2084. I'm going to make a folder this semester for fall 2017, which you don't need to do. So I'm going to save it here. I'm going to check off create directory for solution, so it'll build it inside a subfolder. So if this option's not checked, you want to check it off. So I'll just call this lesson 1. Actually, I'll call it lesson 2. We had no lesson 1. One of the other cool things we can do is if you want to add it so that it's tracked by Git, you can just check add solution, add to source control. I won't do that for now. We'll do that later or next week. And then I'll just click OK. And now it's asking what kind of application do we want to build? So which of these options do we want to pick? Yeah, we want the MVC template. So it says add folders and core references for MVC. Later on, we'll do unit testing. We won't do that today. And by default, it says authentication is none. So no register or login, just a public app. If we want, we can change it. If I say change, and I have all these options, I'll pick individual user accounts. So that will allow users to register and log in. And it also will include some libraries if we want to use things like social media login. So I'll pick MVC. I'll change my authentication to individual user accounts, and we'll click OK. Now it's going to take a minute or two to build the project. And the reason is our project, our starter template, will be about 65 megabytes. So they're going to give us a starter template that has 65 megabytes worth of library support files, starter views, etc. So we'll let this run. It'll take a minute. Again, the faster your computer, the faster this process runs. And if I go to the folder, we can actually see what it builds. So here's my lesson 2. Still building. It's only 17 megs so far. And you can see all the things, if you look down here in the status bar, you can see some of the things that it's automatically adding. So before this is finished, what would be some things we would want to include in our project if we had to build 5 websites? There are probably certain things we're going to want in every one of them. What would be some of the things that all of those applications are going to have? What's something you'd want in every website? Yeah, okay, we'd want a home page. So we know we're going to build that. So they generate one for us because they know we're going to want that. What else are we going to want in any web project besides a home page? Yeah, we might want the ability to search. They may have included that. I'm not sure if they gave us that. What else? Yeah, we're going to want some kind of navigation bar and a header. What else? Okay. For example, what would be an example of a focal point?
Like for search, there's the buttons.
Okay. Yep. What other things could we expect in every website we build we're going to have?
Text.
Sorry?
Text.
Yep. Just some text pages. Yeah, we're going to want header. Probably a shared header. Links. Well, let's have a look. Our template's done. So let's have a look what they gave us. So there's this folder here called references. So all of these are Microsoft code libraries that we can use. Right? What do these do? Microsoft.owin.security.cookies. What do you suppose that's for? Yeah, for generating and reading cookies. So there's an automatic, we don't have to write all the code, we can use that library. What about the ones below it? What kinds of things are these going to do? Well, things like this. What are these libraries for? They should be descriptive by their names. Yep. So it's got security. So what kind of security is this one that I've highlighted going to use? What's that going to allow people to do? Microsoft.owin.security.twitter. Josh? Yeah, we're going to allow people to log into our site with their Twitter account. So all of these libraries we can use. We don't have to write the code, but it all has functions, features we can use. We've got our content folder. I'm very surprised when I said, what's one thing all our sites are going to need? Nobody said a style sheet. So they give us a default style sheet called site.css, right? Which again, you can override, you can put any CSS you want, but at least they saved you the time so you don't have to create a style sheet. What other style sheets did they give us? Yeah, they gave us Bootstrap. For those of you at CIS, have you used Bootstrap before at all? No? Okay. For somebody who has used Bootstrap, can you explain what it is? Alex?
CSS framework that improves the speed of making the website.
Yeah, it's a pre-built CSS library that's very commonly used. So if we don't want to use it, we can delete it, but it has all kinds of layouts and classes for building responsive sites. So we'll probably keep it, but then we can override it with our own custom style sheet. It gives us a few controllers. The account controller is because we said we wanted users to be able to register and log in. So it built a controller for us that handles all the code for users signing in. So we don't have to write login code, it's already here. We can get rid of it if we don't need it. We can change it if we don't like how it works and we want it to work differently. It includes a fonts folder if we want to download custom fonts, a models folder. Surprised nobody mentioned these. Right? Look at all the JavaScripts it assumes we're going to want. Again, you can delete any of them you don't want. So what's the most important one in here that we probably will need on every site? We used it last semester in our PHP application. We've got all these jQuery libraries. So if you don't want jQuery, fine, you can get rid of it. But rather than going and having to download all these or copy and paste them, Visual Studio just puts them in here for us, which is great. Here are where all the actual views go. So somebody mentioned we need a home page. So here's our home page. So it's mostly HTML. What do you suppose is the purpose of this file? It includes many of the things you said we were going to need. So what does this file do? What's the purpose of it? What have we got up at the top here? Yeah, we got our navigation at the top. What do we have down at the bottom? Yeah, we've got our footer. So our content gets injected here. That's where we load the content. So this is our site template. This is the layout that all of our views are using. So they give us a default template that we can change, right? It says, for example, so it says application name. Set our site layout here and modify this however we want. It even gives us a little favorite icon in the browser. And it gives us this important file. This is an XML document called web.config. What do you suppose would be the purpose of this file? You can guess. What's happening here on line 12? This is the most important part. What information is this? Yeah, our database connection goes here, and then it's available for our code to connect to our database and get our dynamic data, our saved data to our database. So it automatically sets up a local connection string for us. Now, Visual Studio has a couple of other really neat features. One of them, if you think back to how we ran in order to run your PHP pages locally on your laptops, what did you have to install in order to see them work in a browser? Yeah, we had to install an Apache server, right? WAMP or XAMPP. Probably everybody has that on their laptop. Visual Studio says, no, you don't have to install a web server. We've included one. It's built right into Visual Studio. So to launch it, all I do is click on debug. And if I choose start without debugging, it's going to do a few things. In a minute, it will load our template website in a browser. We don't have to start a separate web server. The web server is included in Visual Studio. So it'll take a minute, and it runs it on localhost, and for every Visual Studio project, it randomly just assigns a different port number. So we can have different projects open, and each one will run at a different address. Now, the first time we load it, it's kind of slow, as you can see, and I'll explain why in a minute. But we can actually see. So we haven't changed anything. We haven't written any code. This is just what Visual Studio gives us. That's quite a bit, right? Here's our header. It uses Bootstrap for the CSS. We've got a home page. They give us a little nav bar with a few content text pages, some of you mentioned. Got our footer. They built a register and login form. And because it's using Bootstrap, it's also mobile responsive. Oh, it should be, right? So it gives us our little hamburger menu. So they've assumed, Microsoft assumed, we're probably going to want all this stuff for every website. So rather than us having to build all this stuff from scratch, this is like our starter project. And now we can change it as much as we want to. But they've done all this work to get us started. So let's say we want to change this here in the header. That says application name. If we go to our layout file, so again, that's in views and shared, and we open up underscore layout, on line 20, this is a server-side link, but just generates a regular A tag in the browser. So here it says application name. I'll change that to COMP2084 lesson 2. And that should change that title in our nav bar. So that was on line 20 of views, shared, and layout. So now if I go back to my home page, right, we've just modified the template. So if we want to add or change these links in our navigation bar, well, we could just add links right here. I'm going to use this action link. It's the same as a regular A tag, basically. Let's put on, for example, another link that says services. We refresh our page, we should now have another link in the nav bar. If you click it, you're going to get a 404 error page, right? Because we have no services. Doesn't exist yet. We're just adding a link. We'll go back. All right, so here's our link. We added to our layout. Clicking it gives us 404. That's okay. So that's how we'd modify our header. We can get rid of this layout page entirely. You could build your own, or you could take out everything in here and make your own template. Add your own CSS. You can lay this out however you like. They've given this as a starting point to save us work. So the idea is we're supposed to change this, right? Because not every website's going to look the same. But it's a starting place. So let's look at how these work. Time's almost up. So I want to show you, kind of go back to this model so we can look at what happens when I click About. Right? When I click Home About, here's where it goes. It loads this view. Where do we find that view? Well, inside of Home, Views, Home, here's the About page. Now notice what's here. We have some HTML that says use this area, right? That shows up down here. But we also have this text above that says your application description page. If we look in the view, that content isn't there. It doesn't say your application description. It says viewbag.message, and same, viewbag.title. Yeah, our title is about, and it says this. So where is that information that's being displayed on this view? Where does that information come from? Obviously, this is dynamic data. It's coming from somewhere else. So if we wanted to change the content on this page, where is that dynamic data coming from? What file would we look in if we wanted to change that stuff? So on our view, where's the data coming from? Somebody said it over here. Right, from the controller. So the controller that's loading this view, it's passing in a title and message. Well, let's have a look at that and maybe we can change it. So if we scroll up to controllers and we open up the, and if we look at the URL, which controller are we looking for? Yeah, we want to look for the home controller. So if we open up home controller, there are 3 methods or functions in this controller. So if we change this, let's change the message here to say this is the about page. So the data our controller is sending to the view is different, right? We're sending a different string of text. So when we refresh the about page, it should look different, shouldn't it? So I'll save my controller. Doesn't really matter what this says. You can put in any message, just change the text so we can see it's different. And I'll click on about again. And it didn't work. Now, we didn't do anything wrong, and we are in the right place, but we missed one step. And it's important we talk about this because this is where ASP.NET is really different from PHP. In PHP, we just change the code and save it and refresh, and that change will work. In ASP.NET, if we change the HTML, like we did here, we can just press save, go to the browser, refresh, and we'll see those changes, right? We added the link. I pressed save, I went to the browser, and it's changed. So HTML we can just save, but when we change the C# code, we have to do one other thing before that code becomes active. What we have to do is we have to compile or build our code. This is one of the reasons that makes ASP.NET so powerful. What does it mean? So notice here when I'm going to go into my project. Here's lesson 2. In here, there's this little folder called bin. So these are all of the support libraries our code is using. And this is our project file. And notice the time, if you can see it. It says lesson2.dll. And it was timestamped at 4:30 today, so 8 minutes ago. Now, I made my change 1 minute ago, but this file's 8 minutes old. It said we need to compile the code. What does that mean to compile code? Yeah, basically, when we compile our code in Visual Studio, it converts all the C# files in our project into one file, this file here called the DLL, where it converts all the code to ones and zeros. There's a few big benefits to doing this. So PHP is not compiled, but C# and ASP.NET, our code is compiled. What would be the benefits of compiling our code? It does several things for us. Yeah, it's going to run much faster. Ones and zeros are interpreted a lot faster than all the script. So code that's compiled is faster. Why else is compiled code better?
It's debugging on the run.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Yep. Which is more secure and why?
Because we will not launch a syntax error in an application because the computer will just yell at us.
Okay, that's a good point. Now, when we use Visual Studio for programming fundamentals, we already saw this. If I leave out a semicolon here and save my file, in PHP, I can load the file in the browser and it's going to crash, right? And it will say expected semicolon, I get an error. In Visual Studio, first of all, it tells me I made an error. But when I try to compile my code into ones and zeros, I click Build and Build Solution. It tries and it says, sorry, we can't create a new DLL file because you're missing a semicolon in the home controller on line 18. And when I click here, it takes me right to that line and I put my mouse over and it tells me, hey, we're expecting a semicolon here. So many of the errors that we make when we're coding, when our code's compiled, our editor tells us and fixes those errors before we put this in a browser. So it runs faster, we fix our errors, it's also more secure. If we think about when we build a PHP application, right? I put my PHP applications from last semester up on, I use the DreamHost server. So if I just connect to DreamHost for a minute, all of my files, right? So they're all in here from last semester. Here are all our different lessons. So if somebody gets access to the web server, they can take all the code, right? And it will include all of my logic. What else does it include besides all our logic? All our credentials, right? The database connection, so they have access to everything. When our code gets compiled, here's what it looks like with the C# application. Oops. All we have to do is we put our HTML up, pages, and in the bin we put up the DLL, that locked file. All the individual code files with all the C# code, we don't have to put those on the server for our application to run. So if somebody gets into the web server, they don't have all of our C# source code. We have it. This protects us one other way. What happens when our customer wants to change their website? What do they have to do if they want to make changes to the logic and code of the website? Who do they have to call? Us, because we have the source code. It doesn't live on the server and we don't give it to them. So it's much harder for them to take their website and go somewhere else, right? Because we have the code. So it's harder for hackers to take it, but it means we can maintain control of our own work in a way we don't with PHP and interpreted languages. The only bad news is it means if you have to make changes, you have to have a computer with Visual Studio on it and you have to have the code, or you can't make changes to the C#. So now that I've built, notice my DLL is now updated. So now if I click About, this should change. When I first build, the first time I run it again, it's slow because it has to recompile. And then after that, it'll be fast. But the first page I load will be slow. Right? So whenever we change C# code, we have to rebuild our solution before we'll see that change in a browser. Last thing I'm going to show you, and then we'll leave for today. I said the naming is really important, right? If our URL says about, it looks for a function called about, a method with the same name. Notice it says return view, but we haven't said what view to load. It automatically loads the view with the name about. So the naming is important. Okay. So I'm going to do this for a minute. You don't have to do this, but you can try it. I'm going to go to my about view. So again, it's in views about. I'm going to rename this file. So I'm going to change it from about to, let's say, about us. What will happen now when I click my about link? So notice it tries to find a file called about with one of those extensions. And if it can't find any of them, we get a 404 not found error. So the URL names have to match the names of our functions in the controller, and they have to match the names of the views. And if we do that, it loads them automatically. Now, maybe I want to call my view about us. For some reason, I don't want to use the same name. So in that case, when I load the view, I can just say, load the view with a different name. Now it knows exactly what view to load. Save that, but before it will work, I need to do one more thing because I'm changing my controller code. What do I have to do? Yeah, I just need to build. So I will build again. Does take a minute. So you don't want to build every time you save a change because it's a bit slow. Build when you need to test out your work in the browser. It rebuilt my DLL. And now my link should work. It can load a view with a different name because I've told it, hey, load the view called about us. So now it works again. Because I've specified, look for a view with this name, and here's our file called about us. Now, Alex, you also mentioned runtime debugging. We'll talk about that next week, but that's also a really important feature that saves us a lot of time in helping us find and fix our errors. Pankaj, question?
Yeah, you put that return view to about us.
Yes.
So if you change like public action result to about us, what would happen?
Ah, great question. Okay, let's try it. This will be the last thing. So I'll change the. So in that case, I can take this out, right? Because the view's called about us, the action's called about us. So now it will load. I can leave it in, but I don't need the name. I can delete that. But I need to do one more thing. If we run this and build, we're still going to get an error. I'll show you why. We'll just wait till this finishes building. Now we got a 404. How come? What other change do we have to make? Why didn't this work? Sorry? Yeah, we need to change the layout. So what URL will get it to work now? If I add about us, how it works, right? Because the URL name has to match the action name, and the action name has to match the method name. So, as anyone said, right? Here, our action link, it says about, but it needs to call the about us method. So now, if I just refresh, right? Now it calls the URL about us, which matches the method name, which matches the view name. So if we wanted to make a services page, what would we need to do? So right now, this gives us 404. Here, we can do this really quick. It'll take us 2 seconds to fix this. We have to do two things. How would we get this to load a services page? What's the first thing we need to do? Yeah, so we make a view called services. So we can do that. So inside home, we'll choose add view. Actually, we'll say, sorry, we'll choose this one. MVC5 page view with layout. That will use our template. It'll use our layout. So you have our header and footer. So I'll choose this option. We'll call it services. And now it says, okay, what template do we want? Well, we want to use our layout that has our header and footer and Bootstrap. We'll just click the first one. And it should give us a page that's almost blank. So it uses our template. So let's just put on here maybe a heading that says services. There's our view. So now how do we get this view to load? We need about 3 lines of C# code to load this view. So where would we go to load it? Yeah, we go to our home controller. We'll create one more result of an action. What name do we need to give it? Yeah, we call it services. We just say return the view, which is also called services. Making a new page should be as simple as this. And now we just want to build one more time, and now our services link should work. I built. And now if I refresh, it'll be slow for a minute, but services should load. So there's our page with our heading. So creating new pages is really easy. Create a view, use the template, put all your content on, and then write a method in the controller with the same name that loads the view. And if we want to pass data, we can do it this way. Pass it from the controller and the view can display it. So this structure is new. May take a few weeks to get used to, but it actually makes life really easy. And it lets us build things really fast if we follow the rules. Okay. Does anybody have any questions before we finish for today? No. So what we're going to do next week, we'll set up a new project. We'll set up our music store project. So it'll be separate from this one. It will look like this because we'll use the template for starters, but then we'll start going through that tutorial series. And probably we'll start with our database. We'll get our database set up and build our music store database. And then we'll start building the features of it next week with the controllers. So if you don't have Visual Studio and SQL Server installed this week, we'll want to get that set up. We'll also want to get everybody set up with their Azure hosting accounts as well for next week, as well as GitHub.
Can we use other than Microsoft Azure? Because I have bought my own that.
Absolutely, but just one thing to note, a lot of web hosting companies don't run Windows, like they don't run. So your host has to support ASP.NET and SQL Server, which they may or they may not. If you use a cheap host like, say, HostGator, they don't support ASP.NET. Okay, so you have to check whether they'll support it. If they support it, that's fine. By all means, use any host you like. But you get free access to Azure as a Georgian student. So we can host our stuff there, and we'll go through that next week, how to do it. Okay. If you need any help getting anything set up, I have office hours this week and next week. So please come and see me before class so I can help you get set up. Okay. Other than that, that's all. Have a great week. I'll see you all on Tuesday.